So welcome everyone to the Pichette Auditorium at Pembroke College. My name is Father Nick Austin and I'm the Master of Campion Hall. And it's my pleasure today to welcome you to the Laudato Si Research Institute celebration entitled Realistic Hope, Theological Ethics and Conservation Practice. Just for those who, a very warm welcome to all of those in the auditorium with us, whether you're from Oxford or further afield, and also to those who are joining us live on the webinar. You're all very welcome. For those in the auditorium, just a few brief COVID announcements. Please keep your face coverings on and observe social distancing. And that involves also staying seated during the break unless you need to use the restroom. And for those in the auditorium, the lectures will be over at 6 p.m. when you'll be warmly welcome to wander over the road to Campion Hall. So first of all, I'd like to welcome the very Reverend Damien Howard, who is the Jesuit Superior of the Jesuits in Britain, and who was instrumental in bringing the Laudato Si Research Institute to Campion Hall in the University of Oxford. So Damien, thank you for being with us today, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Nick, and ladies and gentlemen, very nice indeed to see you all here today. I've been watching as the Laudato Si Research Institute has unfolded over the last few months, and it's been a real joy to see how far it's come and how quickly. So many congratulations to Celia and all her colleagues on getting to this point of celebrating the wonderful things that are going on. I was glad myself the other day to be listening to the news and to hear that listening to Mozart, specifically to his Sonata for two pianos, has positive health outcomes for people living with epilepsy. Now, I've been a Radio 3 fan since I was a child, so I've always known that listening to classical music was good for you and in fact turned you into a superior kind of person, such as myself. So there was a big smug grin that came across my face as I heard that news. You will understand that it came off very quickly when they followed it with the news that people who'd listened to Haydn's 94th Symphony, however, had rather bad health outcomes. So it seems to me the devil is rather in the detail, and the Viennese symphonic tradition needs to come with health warnings and side effects. We Christians use the word hope an awful lot. It's easy to say today that hope is in short supply. But in fact, there are all sorts of hopes hovering in the atmosphere as we confront the ecological crisis. And it's a little bit like Haydn and Mozart. In fact, the hopes are rather more divergent than those two composers. The music that we let into our ears and into our minds affects us, but likewise the hopes that we imbibe affect us too, for good and for ill. Some of us hope in technology, some of us hope for a political change, some of us hope for radical civilizational and cultural change in humanity. And I don't know which of those are realistic, and I certainly don't know which of those for sure are good for us to listen to and to imbibe. But I do know that there's a deeper hope, a great hope, that we as Christians are summoned to invest our lives in and to articulate a song to sing for the whole world. And that's a hope in the God who saves us and the God who is in an unbreakable pact of solidarity with us and who we know wants to accompany us through this crisis and bring something good out of it. Pope Benedict, in his great encyclical Spe Salvi, said this: we need the greater and lesser hopes that keep us going every day. But these are not enough without the great hope, which must surpass everything else. This great hope can only be God, who encompasses the whole of reality and who can bestow upon us what we by ourselves cannot attain. God is the foundation of hope, not any God, but the God who has a human face and who's loved us to the end, each one of us and humanity in its entirety. It seems to me really important that we begin the work of today and the work of the LSRI by immersing ourselves in that hope very, very deeply, because I think that hope will orient us, it will certainly galvanize us and energize us as we set about establishing what is a realistic hope here in this world and on this planet. And I commend that hope to all of you today, to the work of the LSRI. Keep them, please, in your prayers as they move forward to offer this hope to a world that desperately needs it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Father Damien. And I'd now like to introduce Professor Peter Davidson, who's a Senior Research Fellow at Campion Hall. And he's going to read for us a poem of the great Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins entitled God's Grandeur. Thank you, Peter.
The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, have trod, have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, O morning, at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings.
Thank you, Peter. Now I'd like to introduce the very Reverend Professor Jane Shaw. Jane is the principal of Harris Manchester College here in the University of Oxford and is also a Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the university. And after Jane, we'll also be hearing from Dr. Celia Dean Drummond, who is the Director of the Laudato Si Research Institute. So Jane.
Well, this is a wonderful event to celebrate this wonderful institute. And I think it's fitting that we have opened today's proceedings with Gerard Manley Hopkins' sonnet, God's Grandeur. Not only because it's a wonderful hymn of praise to God's creation, not only because Hopkins was a superb poet, and not only because he was a Jesuit, but because it's poetry that reminds us why we cannot do the kind of research to which the LSRI is dedicated without being interdisciplinary in our approach. In order to tackle some of the world's greatest problems, such as poverty and inequality, the ecological crisis and how to become sustainable as a society, of course we need the crucial science and data. Of course, we need the methods of social science to analyze that data, but we also need the humanities. We need the humanities in order to remind us of why we care and how we should care. And as one of the Institute's current projects reminds us, of the importance of gratitude in our approach, in our approach of hope. The arts and humanities are crucial for the ways in which they enable us especially to develop empathy, stepping into the experience of others, making the leap to go beyond ourselves, to care about others and to care about God's creation, to help us develop a moral imagination and therefore an ethical framework. It's a really great pleasure and an honour to speak today in support of this brilliantly innovative institute based at Campion Hall. It really is a great addition to the collegiate university as a whole. Its focus is absolutely in tune with the university's strategy to promote research that seeks to change the world for the better. And I think it's really important that research institutes are based in colleges and halls as well as university departments for many reasons, but let me name just one crucial one right now. Colleges and halls are by their very nature interdisciplinary, conducive to the serendipitous conversation over dinner or lunch between a fellow you see every day and another fellow who perhaps comes in occasionally, or a visitor, between an astrophysicist and a poet, whoever it might be, a theologian and a historian. But nevertheless, it's that serendipitous conversation you have, perhaps by surprise, that can offer just the unexpected key that's needed to solve a particular problem or take the next step in the research that you're doing. And I know that Campion Hall will be a wonderful home. It's a wonderful place of hospitality. It has a great Jesuit tradition of hospitality, and I know it has also an extremely significant research profile already. So the Institute simply adds to that, and it's going to be fantastic, and it already has been. So congratulations on all that's already been achieved. I know that you've already raised lots of wonderful grant money, and there's also been lots of excellent research done already. So best wishes for the future as well as congratulations. And I think this institute is going to really contribute enormously to the university's research profile as a whole. So thank you very much for setting it up. And I personally really look forward to seeing the fruits of the research and perhaps being involved in one or two conversations along the way. So thank you.
So when the Laudato Si encyclical was released in 2015, I could not possibly have imagined that 6 years later I'd be directing a research institute bearing its name. The encyclical has been more widely discussed amongst scholars in the natural and the social sciences than any other encyclical before or since. And it marked a turning point in official church teaching at the interface of theology, ecology, and the natural sciences. More importantly, it featured new opportunities to foster and contribute to impact-laden research that's both academic and relevant to the wider secular and ecclesial communities. I've been privileged to spend the last 3 years developing the basic strategic framework and gaining grants in close collaboration with like-minded scholars and activists. Our vision is simple: model a different way of being an academic research institute that works through transdisciplinary methods in ways that influence actors in policy and practice, with a goal of enabling socio-ecological transformation and care for our common home to become a reality at different levels: the individual level, the community level, and the structural level. Such a vision, while simple, is ambitious, opening up possibilities for innovative intellectual work, integrating insights from theology, philosophy, and the humanities at the cutting edge of different disciplines, alongside and in solidarity with the poorest communities of the world and those who are actively engaged in eco-social practice. Campion Hall, as just been mentioned, with its long history of intellectual work in philosophy, theology, and Ignatian traditions, is an ideal home to situate this new institute. We're so grateful for their support, and particularly the provincial Damien Howard, for his visionary approach to the development of LSRI, and the Jesuits in Britain for their generosity in enabling its establishment. We've grown as an institute since our first small steps in 2019. It's the combined skills of staff, both academic and administrative, who have and are enabling us to become a presence both in Oxford and on an international stage, even amid a global pandemic. Associate Director Dr. Becky Artanian-Kaiser's superb leadership and hard work has allowed us to design and create the structural and strategic processes that we need as a research institute in order to achieve our aims and goals. Dr. Severin Denulin, who I will introduce in a minute, has become our Director of International Development. Dr. Carlos Zepeda, our Assistant Director of Policy and Practice. Dr. Tim Howells, Assistant Director of Research Programming. Ed Duque, our Carbon Transition Officer. Bethany Solaridaire, our Postdoctoral Fellow. And Harriet David, our Administrator, who has worked with us and beyond the call of duty to make this and many other events a success. Ying Yang and Sarah Gray, based at Campion Hall, also contribute to developing our outreach. Our celebration today is therefore a credit to them all. By bringing today together a leading Catholic theologian alongside an academic marine biologist who's turned his attention to transformative practice, we hope you will come away with a flavour, at least, of what the Institute is trying to achieve. I'm now handing over to Dr. Severin Denulin, who will introduce our first speaker, and she's also an Associate Fellow at the Oxford Department of International Development. So thank you, Severin.
Well, it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Lisa Sowle Cahill to give this opening address of our celebration. Lisa is the Donald Monand S.J. Professor of Theology at Boston College. She is a past president of the Catholic Theological Society of America and the Society of Christian Ethics. Her books include Blessed Are the Peacemakers, Pacifism, Just War, and Peace Building, A Theology and Practice of Gender Equality, Global Justice, Christology, and Christian Ethics. Her Wikipedia entry, although I know it's not a source that academics should cite, but nonetheless, her Wikipedia entry says that her work focuses on an attempt to discuss the complexity of moral issues while lowering tensions about theological disagreements between the church and society. And I think this is quite a good, accurate summary of Lisa's work. The title of Lisa's lecture today is Realistic Hope in Apocalyptic Times, the Ecological Challenges to Catholic Social Teaching, which is part of a forthcoming book with Georgetown University Press entitled Ethics in Apocalyptic Times, Realistic Hope in Christian Politics. So Lisa, over to you. I think you have 30 minutes.
And thanks, Severin, for the marvelous introduction. And of course, special thanks to Celia and Nick, along with the Society of Jesus and Oxford University for inviting me here in the first place. It's a wonderful celebration of a wonderful new venture. And I'm especially grateful to Cardinal Czerny, who will bring to this whole discussion a familiarity with Catholic ministries and activities that's vastly greater than my own. We are all here, of course, to celebrate the work and future of the Laudato Si Institute. The LSRI is already at work on important strategic applications of its namesake encyclical Laudato Si. This year's projects address biodiversity and women's solidarity and mining, among other important topics. These are inspired by Laudato Si's gospel-based vision of love of neighbor, the interconnectedness of creation, and solidaristic action. In the name of this vision, we gather today. Yet going forward, interpreters of Laudato Si and of Catholic social teaching generally must confront very directly the odds we are up against. I refer especially to the rapid advance of environmental disaster and to the power of the forces aligned against reform. Our hope for timely and adequate action is real. It must also be realistic. It is in fact not easy to give an account of our Christian environmental hope, as 1 Peter urges. Jesus' ministry of the inbreaking reign of God, embodied in love and justice, has been and is the theopolitical center of Christian social action and of Catholic social teaching. Yet the environmental crises already upon us call into question just how far the reign of God can be inaugurated historically. Our hopeful reign of God politics can find a necessary dose of realism in the biblical genre of apocalypse. I will develop this point in 4 steps. First, our present time as apocalyptic. Second, assets and lacunae of Laudato Si. Third, biblical apocalypse and its politics. And fourth, women's environmental activism as an enlargement of Laudato Si's vision. First, then, our present apocalyptic condition. In cultural commentary, political advocacy, and Christian political ethics, the imagery of apocalypse captures the imminently world-ending nature of a real or expected historical disaster, for which evil humans on the whole, not just a particular guilty subset, bear responsibility. In the popular imagination, apocalypse diagnoses a fundamental problem with the world that human efforts cannot resolve. As one scholar of apocalyptic literature and film describes it, the coming catastrophic punishment has been determined and will come no matter what. Human agency has been vacated. So the appeal is that the world of sin, oppression, and injustice finally gets what it so richly deserves: absolute obliteration. Over the past half century, the destruction of the planet Earth as a suitable human habitat has become an urgent focus of apocalyptic politics. Theologian Michael Northcott writes of a climate apocalypse. Northcott's point is that the response of the climate system to gradually increasing greenhouse gas emissions is relatively slow in human terms, which deters humans from appreciating the magnitude of the danger, its irreversibility, or the importance of taking immediate and radical steps to interrupt it. Apocalyptic scenarios might induce humans to imagine their situation with a degree of alarm it merits. Northcott cites the scientist environmentalist James Lovelock, who personifies the planetary ecosystem as a retributive divinity. With prescience attested by the 2020 COVID pandemic, Lovelock warns the Earth, or Gaia, will compensate for the ecological excess of too many human beings by ridding herself of most of them. The diagnosis of the present time as apocalyptic seems apropos when we consider that Catholic social teaching has been proclaiming love of neighbor and calling for justice since at least 1891. Yet conditions of inequality, violence, racism, and sexism persist. This same problem threatens environmental ethics and Christian calls for environmental justice, like conservation of the oceans, the forests, and the planetary climate. Yet Pope Francis does not address the likelihood either that humans will not rise to the challenges before us, or that the consequences will be cataclysmic for our and other species. climate change, overconsumption of resources, biodiversity loss, and pollution already have reached proportions so great that large regions of the earth are becoming uninhabitable, perhaps irreversibly so. International mitigation remains incredibly weak. The nature of the problems themselves, the adequacy of strategies of alleviation, and the political motivation to succeed all seem to surpass humanity's scientific knowledge, political acuity, and moral resources. Despite biblical themes such as cosmic Christ from Colossians and new creation, Romans 8, Celia Dean Drummond put before us 9 years ago what is now an even more urgent question. How can humans put into practice elements of this transformative hope? The threat and present reality of climate change, with its apocalyptic images of destruction uppermost in the common mind, can easily lead to a sense of fear or even paralysis. Second, then, we turn to Laudato Si and realistic hope. To overcome moral paralysis, despair, and deliberate political obstructionism was the aim of Pope Francis's 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, which appeared only a few months before the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris. Implementation of the Paris Accords prescriptions continues to be uneven and too slow. Even so, Laudato Si drew global attention to the need for action and made a lasting impact. Now we look forward to the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow next November. This is a fresh opportunity for Catholic advocacy in the hope that we are in a Kairos moment of international awareness, receptivity to the power of religious worldviews, and readiness for emergency action. Laudato Si brings to the table several advances in Catholic social thought. Especially significant are Francis's inclusion of all beings on the planet in an interconnected whole, his interfaith outreach, his diagnosis of the key problem as a lack of political will, his efforts to spark energy and commitment at every level of society, and his use of aesthetic, imaginative, and ritual media to make his case. The Church has a unique role in cultural conversion through education, formation, and cultivation of a Eucharistic spirituality. The death of Jesus gives meaning to the suffering that resistance to evil brings, yet offers hope through the resurrection and sending of Christ's Spirit. Perhaps most importantly, Pope Francis turns to popular mobilization. Laudato Si, amplified by the Amazon Synod, relies on local stakeholders, not elite leaders, for motivation, wisdom, and solutions. Pope Francis is confident in the power of popular movements, seen, for example, in the conference, A Politics Rooted in the People, last April. Pope Francis believes that what Laudato Si terms social love moves social agents to devise ever larger strategies to halt environmental degradation. In line with Catholic tradition, he connects local initiatives to the networked regional and global efforts so necessary to make change sustainable and far-reaching. Nevertheless, there are two blind spots in Laudato Si and later documents such as Querida Amazonia and Fratelli Tutti. These lacunae undermine the Pope's program of taking social sins seriously and of drawing out the righteous power of popular political agency. First, he underappreciates the positive role of political conflict to increase pro-environment power and to enact enforceable policies. And second, he lacks the gender lens, not only to register the disproportionate effects of environmental harms on women, but especially to endorse and encourage women's own political efficacy as change agents. Third, then, biblical apocalypse and realistic hope. Fundamental Christian resources for radical yet realistic hope include two different yet overlapping eschatologies, both found in the Christian biblical canon. These are apocalypse and kingdom or reign of God. Kingdom of God is arguably the main theme or symbol of the ministry and teaching of Jesus as portrayed in the Gospels. Apocalypse is seen most representatively in Daniel in the Hebrew Bible and in the book of Revelation in the Christian New Testament. The nature of the end and the time and means by which it will arrive are the main points of difference among different eschatologies. Christian biblical scholars often speak of Jesus' ministry of the reign of God in terms of an inaugurated eschatology and inbreaking fulfillment or parousia. Even under historical conditions, the inbreaking reign of God makes it possible for humans to exist within a redeemed relation to God that begins transformation of earthly relationships and societies. This, however, is not the outlook typical of apocalyptic, generated as it often is under conditions of political exclusion and oppression, thus aiming to give hope to the hopeless. Apocalyptic authors and communities are looking for a decisive, divinely enacted end to injustice and the replacement of the present historical order with an entirely new one. Biblical apocalypse conveys a dualistic picture of the present and future worlds and presents divine, not human agency as the vehicle of change. As such, it provides a complement or alternative to the more familiar reign of God eschatology, to the expectation that new creation means the transformation, not replacement, of the world as we know it, and to the more confident politics associated with Catholic social tradition. That said, biblical apocalypse does not always reinforce historical fatalism, nor is it homogeneous. Within Jewish apocalyptic, which includes non-canonical examples such as 1 Enoch, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and 2 Esdras, there are at least 3 different political models existing in a tensive, not systematic relationship. These are 1, the historical restoration of Israel under a royal Messiah like David; 2, the replacement of the present world by a divine new creation; and 3, everyday resistance generated at the practical level by the critique of empire contained even within narratives of political despair. Even given the reject and replace framework, apocalyptic counter-narratives can reinforce a historical mood of refusal and subversion, sustaining work for changes within the existing evil system. These 3 models can coexist within the same text. At least 2 of them, historical restoration and everyday resistance, as well as an anticipatory inbreaking eschatological fulfillment like the reign of God, are present in the Dead Sea Scrolls, a possible background influence on the teaching of Jesus. Not only Revelation, but also passages in the Synoptic Gospels, especially Mark 13, retain apocalyptic themes. In an apocalyptic mode, Jesus decried the vast disparity between the present order of things and God's reign, and announced God's imminent fearsome judgment. The 2 themes of dualism and judgment are reasserted impressively in the most apocalyptic book in the New Testament, Revelation. In Revelation, the whore Babylon, a stand-in for Roman imperial power, as well as for all worldly powers that conscript and pervert human agency, is defeated in a cosmic battle by the heavenly Jerusalem, a symbol of God's righteous and world reordering reign. Revelation memorably shares with Jewish Apocalyptic a dualism of worlds and the utter defeat of evil through divine combat that vindicates the righteous. A Christian politics of realistic hope does not underestimate the magnitude of worldly powers and structures, nor place undue confidence either in human agency or in the attainment of historical utopias. Yet, as still an inbreaking reign of God politics, it does trust that divine power in history is advanced through graced human action. Recognize that the church, as body of Christ in the world, encourages a politics of compassion, mercy, and justice, and make broad-based inclusion of the excluded essential to Christian social ethics. My argument is that all four models prove necessary to a Christian political ethics for the Anthropocene. A realistically hopeful environmental ethics takes full stock of, 1, the radical difference between the times for which we hope and those in which we live. 2, the judgment of God upon evildoers, structures, and systems. 3, the possibility yet uncertainty of historical remediation. And 4, a reign of God hope that the body of Christ can seed political change by existing authentically in and for the world. Laudato Si illustrates the ethic of realistic hope that I propose by integrating tensively these four political models found in Jewish and early Christian eschatologies. The encyclical contrasts sharply the technocratic and the integral ecological paradigms. It indicts powerful elites and complicit beneficiaries who lack the political will to oppose the status quo. It demands radical change, all in line with the dualism of worlds model. We find hope for eco-social realignment in a new divinely installed political order, the historical restoration model, but minus a single anointed political messiah. And Pope Francis mobilizes the people in the name of one common home, the model of everyday resistance. Finally, with the inbreaking reign of God, Pope Francis trusts that divine power will infuse human power. He proclaims the urgent challenge to protect our common home includes a concern to bring the whole human family together, to seek a sustainable and integral development. For we know that things can change. The Creator does not abandon us. Humanity still has the ability to work together in building our common home. Laudato Si further implies that the battle against and defeat of unconverted unjust forces will be necessary. It asserts that non-governmental and intermediate groups must pressure governments to develop more rigorous regulations, procedures, and controls. According to Pope Francis, unless citizens control political power, national, regional, and municipal, it will not be able to control damage to the environment. Those were quotes from 179. On that note, we turn to the role of women as indispensable citizen activists who are not afraid of conflicts over political power. In the Amazon and other regions, indigenous women forcefully resist the extractive industries, militate for pollution cleanups, and advocate for indigenous land rights and agriculture against mining contracts, logging, cattle farming, and monoculture, all drivers of biodiversity loss. The consequences for these women include harassment, rape, and murder, not only because they threaten economic interests, but because they violate cultural and religious norms of women's proper place. The Church's official teaching documents have yet to face up to these realities. Positively, Laudato Si uses imagery of the earth as mother and sister, but still does trade on stereotypes of women as awaiting rescue, unable to assert their own rights. Positively, Querida Amazonia praises women's roles, but disappointingly cautions that such roles must reflect their womanhood. Fratelli Tutti jumps miles ahead by calling for social friendship, repeatedly specified in gender-inclusive terms, brothers and sisters, women and men. Yet Pope himself grants that although women and men possess the same dignity and identical rights, we say one thing with words while our decisions and reality tell another story, from number 23. While 66% of church communities in the Amazon region are women, only 33% hold decision-making positions. More encouragingly, though, some local churches and ministries do engage in confrontational politics and do politically empower women. In 1974, the 9 Catholic bishops of the Peruvian jungle created the Amazonian Center for Anthropology and Practical Application, part of whose mission is to empower the indigenous women and youth. More attention by official Catholic social teaching could make such efforts normative for all Catholic activities, resistant cultures notwithstanding. Let me take some cases of women's activism from Peru, where many scholars, including 2 from the LSRI mining project, Denise Bebbington and Deborah Delgado, are doing research. In fact, women have been remarkably active in resisting damage to land, water, farming, and fishing from development and resource extraction. The Catholic Church in Peru has been a strong supporter of indigenous communities, training community leaders, and drawing on national and international Catholic and political networks to push back against transnational corporations. An outstanding example is the Archbishop of Huancayo and now president of the Pan-Amazonian Ecclesial Network, Pedro Ricardo Barreto, a Jesuit. In that role, he has begun to integrate women into the leadership of the Pan-Amazonian Network. Archbishop Barreto testified before the U.S. Congress against a U.S.-based company that ran a lead and copper smelting plant in La Arroya. Over decades, the plant released enough toxic emissions into the air, river, and soil so that the majority of the local population, including 90% of children, 90, suffered serious health deficiencies. The Archbishop established an environmental task force, campaigned personally for the credibility of scientific evidence of lead exposure, and joined forces with an interfaith regional environmental project called Montaro Revive. Examples could be multiplied on many fronts: biodiversity, climate change, and conservation of the Earth's waterways and water resources. In the Loreto region of Peru, 2 Augustinian priests, Manolo Berjon and Miguel Ángel Cadenas, are fending off incursions from multiple oil spills, most notably in Quinanico, as well as a waterway that would connect Peru to Brazil by dredging parts of 3 rivers. Disruption endangers not only people, plants, and animals, but also the spirits believed to inhabit the waters. Berjon and Cadenas are scholars of the Kukama cosmovision. Their advocacy garners well-deserved media attention and praise. Moreover, regional Catholic agencies have helped supply legal counsel and training of indigenous leadership for court battles. Less publicized, especially in Catholic circles, is the indispensable role of women activists and women allies. In La Arroya, women are principal environmental leaders who brought and won a lawsuit against the owners of the smelter. In Quinanico, two religious sisters, Nancy Roca and Elizabeth Quiros, have worked alongside Cadenas and Berjon, ministering to river communities and training village leaders. Maryknoll Sisters cooperate with the Peruvian Human Rights and Environment Association and a team of Quechua and Aymara lawyers to prepare community leaders, women leaders in the Loreto region. If encyclicals, papal exhortations, and other teaching documents were to affirm women's political agency emphatically, insisting on zero tolerance of violence toward women, this would combat all entrenched and sinful structures of gender discrimination, advancing women's environmental initiatives and women's dignity and rights. The local to global presence, legitimacy, and advocacy of the Catholic Church position it for unique effectiveness. In conclusion, neither Catholic social teaching nor climate science can guarantee that our course toward disaster will be miraculously reversed. Yet, as Laudato Si assures, the Creator does not abandon us. Humanity still has the ability to work together in building our common home. From a gospel standpoint, the driver of effective environmental work is the love that does justice. It is radical, courageous, and spirit-inspired work. It is women's work and men's. Sometimes the work must be combative, gathering energy from below. Our hope for its success is realistic, but not for that less real. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for your theological insights into addressing the challenge that lies ahead, and also for enlarging the Catholic social tradition on the basis of women's experiences on the ground. And it is a great honor to have Cardinal Michael Czerny with us today to offer a response and some reflections on Lisa's lecture. Cardinal Czerny is a Jesuit priest and serves as the Under-Secretary of the Section for Migrants of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development in the Vatican. A migrant himself from Czechoslovakia to Canada, Father Michael has served, among others, as founding director of the Jesuit Center for Social Faith and Justice in Toronto. And following the killings of the Jesuits at the University of Central America in El Salvador, he served there as a vice rector and directed an Institute for Human Rights. He has also served as secretary of the Secretariat for Justice at the General Curia of the Jesuits in Rome, and as director of the African Jesuit AIDS Network, and as consultant to the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, and more recently, as a special secretary of the Amazon Synod. So, Father Michael, thank you very much for being with us today and share some of your vast experience and insights. So, Father Michael, over to you.
Thank you. Excellent and dear gentlefolk. First, I thank Professor Cahill for her thoughtful and stimulating lecture. I hope to build on it in my remarks, as we learned to do when we were students together at the Chicago Divinity School a few years ago. The planet, you have to have a PhD in mathematics to figure out how long ago that was. The planetary crisis is looking terribly bad. And I appreciate Lisa's invoking the apocalyptic tradition, which dramatically calls everyone's attention to what, in our present condition and struggles, is essentially what. What is essentially what? Let me make 5 observations. First, Congratulations on the launch of the LSRI. Your ambitious and necessary mission, which is for social and ecological transformation, is worthy of everyone's support. How can the efforts of sponsors, leaders, colleagues, collaborators, and supporters achieve conversion, and so prove genuinely transformative? Laudato Si tells us a great deal about the needed transformations, but what about the subjects of the verb to transform? The who? Who transforms? Throughout the world, poor campesinas, indigenous, and slum women keep regenerating an agenda that starts with access to basic living conditions for their families and children. These are the subjects and the priorities worth assuming first, as LSRI stimulates, promotes, and links efforts to care for our common home. Pope Francis observed, the idea of social policies being a policy for the poor, but never with the poor, and never of the poor, much less part of a project which can bring people back together, sometimes strikes me as a kind of brightly painted dustbin to contain the refuse of the system. Berta Cáceres was an indigenous leader and integral environmental activist in her native Honduras. She played a leading role at the first World Meeting of Popular Movements in Rome in 2014 and was assassinated in 2016. Soon after, at the third World Meeting in Rome, Pope Francis said, "Many of you are playing for keeps." He wanted to remember those who are not here today because they risked their lives. There is no greater love than to give one's life. That is what Jesus teaches. So may I please nominate Berta as a very apt patron saint of the LSRI. A second essential highlighted in Professor Cahill's paper is entitled Laudato Si and Women's Activism. I think it's fair to say that church leaders are listening more and more to women. Some would say, listen until it hurts, which seems like good advice, but there's more to it. Listening gives rise to compassion. There's suffering with, there's learning, and there's deep joy. So we can also say, it hurts until you listen, because avoidance, flight, resistance, defensiveness are all so damaging. Let's leave counterproductive stances behind us and rejoice in any newly liberated listening that God grants and that interlocutors stimulate in us. Professor Cahill rightly insists on women being fully involved, and the Church is certainly on this path. Witness the warm response to Sister Nathalie Bacard being appointed an Undersecretary of the Synod of Bishops. Here is what Pope Francis wrote in Christus Vivit, the exhortation after the Synod on Youth. A living church can react by being attentive to the legitimate claims of those women who seek greater justice and equality. A living church can look back on history and acknowledge long-lasting patterns of male authoritarianism, domination, various forms of enslavement, abuse, and sexist violence. With this outlook, she can support the call to respect women's rights and offer convinced support for greater reciprocity between males and females, while not agreeing with everything some feminist groups propose. Along these lines, the Synod sought to renew the Church's commitment against all discrimination and violence on sexual grounds. That is the response of a church that stays young and lets herself be challenged and spurred by the sensitivities of young people. So while popular movements prioritize the full range of social issues, Berta's participation in Rome reminds us that there are a lot of women, including Berta, standing up for gender issues too. Third, let us consider how political conflict increases pro-environment power towards enacting reinforceable policies. Recall Pope Francis on his first Holy Thursday, washing the feet of 12 prisoners, including 2 women and 2 Muslims. Then in early July, going to Lampedusa to mourn the migrants dying in the Mediterranean and denounce indifference. And in late July, urging young people in Rio de Janeiro, que hagan lío, to raise hell, not only at special events like the GMG, but in every diocese. At the second World Meeting of Popular Movements in Bolivia, referring to the damage, destruction, and pillage of our common home, he said, people and their movements are called to cry out, to mobilize, and to demand, peacefully but firmly, that appropriate and urgently needed measures be taken. This is not in order to promote political conflict. Rather, Pope Francis encourages active engagement and indeed protagonism. He conjugates the energies and encourages them to flow like tributaries into a great river of conversion and transformation. The best way to deal with conflict is the willingness to face conflict head-on, to resolve it, and to make it a link in the chain of a new process. Blessed are the peacemakers. Now, my fourth essential, let us consider the Pope's magisterial and pastoral program in its full sweep and crescendo. Saint Francis of Assisi heard Jesus call to him, "Go repair my church, which, as you see, is falling completely into ruin." Soon after his election, Pope Francis laid out his program in Evangelii Gaudium on the proclamation of the gospel in today's world. Because only a healthy church can really bring the good news everywhere that it's needed. In 2015, Pope Francis entered into dialogue with all people about care for our common home. Laudato Si integrates questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. The 2019 Amazon Synod put Evangelii Gaudium and Laudato Si to a most rigorous test. The subtitle expressed the challenge well, to look for new paths for the church and for an integral ecology. Not some paths over here for the pious and other paths over there for the greens. Not 2 themes scotch-taped together. Rather, like the people of the Amazon are, citizens at once of the church and of the world, needing both, loving both, caring for both. Setting others free from their forms of bondage surely involves caring for the environment and defending it. But even more, helping the human heart to be open with trust to the God who not only has created all that exists, but has also given us himself in Jesus Christ. And now we have Fratelli Tutti, on brother and sisterhood and social friendship. Either we are brothers and sisters, or everything fails and we destroy each other. Brother and sisterhood is the frontier on which we must build, the challenge of our century, the challenge of our times. To the urgency of rebuilding the church and responding to the socio-environmental crisis, Francis adds an even more radical call to shared responsibility as siblings. He elaborates on the culture of encounter and on dialogue and friendship in society, on political love, and on paths of renewed encounter that include reconciliation and forgiveness. Neither the church nor the world can be repaired if the terrible oppositions persist. Indigenous peoples versus settlers, women against men, city depopulating countryside, north-south, and so on. My final message, my final essential, is to look forward urgently to COP26 in Glasgow. I hope that the global Catholic climate movement and other grassroots coalitions nourished by LSRI will tap into 1,000 struggles going on everywhere to bring fresh Catholic advocacy to COP26. Real salvation history has only one time, the present. Facing challenges with faith and love is what generates real and realistic hope. Now is the acceptable time. Now is the day of salvation. Thank you, Professor Cahill, and God bless you and your colleagues in the Laudato Si Research Institute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Michael, for this very inspiring talk and very lot to meditate upon and reflect later on.
It's a real pleasure and a delight to introduce to you this evening Dr. Enric Saller, who's a former university professor who saw himself writing the obituary of ocean life and then left academia to become a full-time conservationist at the National Geographic Explorer in Residence. He founded and leads Pristine Seas, which is a project that combines exploration, research and media to support and empower local communities and inspire country leaders to protect the last wild places in the ocean. To date, Pristine Seas has helped to create 23 of the largest marine reserves on the planet, covering an area of 6.5 million square kilometres. He's earned numerous honours for his work, including 2008 World Economic Forum's Young Global Leader, 2013 Explorers Club Lowell Thomas Award, 2013 Environmental Media Association Hero Award, 2016 Russian Geographic Society Award, and in 2018 Heinz Award in Public Policy. He's a Fellow of the Royal Geographic Society. He earned a BSc in Biology from the University of Barcelona and a PhD in Ecology from Aix-Marseille University in France. Enric was lead author of a study published this March in Nature called Protecting the Global Ocean for Biodiversity, Food and Climate, which found that ocean protections not only support biodiversity, but also boosts fisheries and help the climate as well. As part of the study, Enric and his colleagues developed a new way to identify places that, if protected, will increase food production, safeguard marine life, and reduce carbon emissions. It would be possible to realise these benefits quickly if countries work together to protect at least 30% of the oceans by 2030. Publications also include 2015 Pristine Seas, Journeys to the Ocean's Last Wild Places, and his most recent book, about which he's going to speak today, which shares the title of the lecture, The 2020, The Nature of Nature, Why We Need the Wild. So thank you so much, Enric, for joining us today. I wish it could be in person, but here we are in a virtual situation, but it's still a pleasure to have you join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celia. I wish indeed that I was there in person with all of you. Thank you so very much for inviting me to speak today, and congratulations on this celebration of the Laudato Si Research Institute, which I hope to visit as soon as the situation traveling to the UK becomes a little less difficult. So, you and I have been at conferences on Laudato Si in Rome, and I think we agree that the Laudato Si encyclical letter is an evergreen document, because as long as there will be humans on Earth, we will need to keep reminding ourselves how lucky we are to live on our planet together with millions of other species. We live in a miracle. But first, if I may, let me provide a little personal story so the audience knows who you're listening to. I grew up on the Mediterranean coast of Spain in Catalonia, watching the shows of Jacques Cousteau on television. And I wanted to be an ocean explorer. I wanted to be a diver in Jacques Cousteau's boat, but I was born a little too late for that. So instead, I became a marine biologist. I ended up as a professor at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in La Jolla in California. And my job was to write about the impacts of humans in the ocean, the impacts of fishing, the impacts of global warming. Until one day when I realized that I was just writing the obituary of the ocean. I felt like the doctor who's telling you how you're going to die with excruciating detail, but not offering a cure. So that day I decided to quit academia to work on conservation full-time, to work on the cure. This is how I founded the Pristine Seas Project, which, as Celia mentioned, we've been working with governments, local communities, and indigenous peoples around the world to protect some of the most vital places in the ocean. So, but now let's talk about why we need the wild, which is the title of my book. Now, let's talk about how we are all connected, not just among ourselves humans, but also with all other creatures on Earth. And I believe that the reason why I am here, not with you there, the COVID-19 pandemic, is the best reminder we've had in a long time. A tiny virus, a tiny strand of genetic material has humbled us, the most powerful species living on planet Earth. A tiny virus has told us as clearly and loudly as ever that we are not masters of the universe, but one more piece in an interconnected and interdependent web of life. We all have suffered through this COVID-19 pandemic. Some have lost dear ones, some got sick and went to the hospital, and we all have been restricted in so many ways. The coronavirus has pushed the brakes on our accelerated lifestyle. So the first question is, how did we get into this mess to start with? And the best current scientific evidence suggests that horseshoe bats were the most likely reservoir hosts of the coronavirus, meaning the species where the virus naturally lives and reproduces. The virus may have jumped from bats to other wild animals before spilling over to humans. And this is not the first time that something like this has happened. Today's COVID-19, but yesterday was SARS, HIV, Ebola, and rabies, all zoonotic viruses, meaning they are transmitted from other animals to humans. But how did the virus spill over from wild animals to humans? A pangolin, for example, could get the virus from a bat urine in a tropical forest, or from bats directly at a market where they and other animals are sold, like those wet markets in China. Now imagine a person in those messy markets that gets in contact with an animal or its blood, then touches her face or shakes somebody else's hand, and then gets on a plane to travel to another country. In our globally connected society, that virus can spread like wildfire among humans unless it is immediately contained at the source. And as humans venture deeper and deeper into what was once wild, we not only disrupt these ecosystems, but also come into contact with stressed animals that shed more viruses. Farms intrude upon forest, and loggers and miners pushed into pristine ecosystems. And that increases our chances of being exposed to new diseases for which we have no immunity. And that's where the trouble starts for us, because our planet is becoming less wild. We have turned wild into tame. Today, 96% of the mass of mammals on land are us and our domesticated livestock. Only 4% is everything else, from elephants to tigers to panda bears. 70% of all birds are now domesticated poultry, mostly chickens. And 90% of the large fish in the ocean have been extracted by fishing in the last 100 years alone. Yet today, only 7% of the ocean is designated or planned as a protected area. And while we're doing better on the land, still only 17% of the land is in protected areas. And that means that ecosystems across the world are under threat. And I'd like to give you an example. The Congo Basin forest in West Africa, one of the richest and most valuable ecosystems on the planet. One reason the Congo Basin ecosystem is so rich is that it gets such heavy rain. And here is something fascinating about that rain. The forest itself creates it. Trees absorb water from the ground and release it back into the air thanks to the tropical heat. That water vapor creates rain, which falls and lowers air pressure to draw in more moist air from the Atlantic Ocean. And moist air then releases more rain, which the trees absorb and release back into the air, and so on and so forth. And the Congo Basin in West Africa produces the rain that waters the highlands of Ethiopia on the other side of the continent. But right now, we are cutting down rainforest at the highest rate in a decade, the equivalent of 4 football fields every minute. If we cut down the forest, that cycle will break. The rain will no longer fall in such abundance. That means no more water or food in Ethiopia. That's 125 million people now, probably double that by 2050. And the Ethiopian highlands provide the water for most of the Nile. Enter Sudan and Egypt with an additional 140 million people and growing. And we have already seen the consequences of a region without water and food: riots, instability, collapse of governments, and massive migration to wealthier countries. So when we destroy the forest in one part of Africa, the consequences affect the entire planet. And same thing occurs in the Amazon, where the forest creates its own rain. Actually, there is more water as vapor in the air above the Amazon forest than there is in the actual river. It's a river in the sky. Cut 20% of the remaining Amazon forest, and the forest will turn into a dry savanna. Gone will be the forest and the rain, and the water patterns for the whole world will just go crazy. I have seen the impact of ecosystem disruption, including the risk of disease in the ocean too. Coral reef lagoons used to be full of giant clams, these beautiful animals with iris colors, greens, blues, yellows, filter seawater for a living. And in doing so, remove microbes from the marine environment. At pristine seas, pristine reefs in the middle of the Pacific that still have intact beds of giant clams, our team has measured the cleanest water in the ocean. However, in inhabited coral islands, where giant clams have been depleted for food or for their shells, the water is full of pathogens. And these pathogens include bacteria that can cause gastroenteritis and cholera. So these giant clams and other filter feeders like sponges and clams are like the N95 masks of the lagoon. By removing them, we are increasing our chances to acquire fatal diseases. And of course, there is a clear moral case for why we cannot continue this devastation. And I don't need to tell you at the Laudato Research Institute about the moral case. But the coronavirus pandemic has made it crystal clear that there is still a more powerful case for most people, which is human survival. Again and again, researchers have found that when we degrade habitats, animals such as bats become more stressed and shed more viruses. On the other hand, forests with a diversity of microbial, plant, and animal species harbor less disease. Biodiversity dilutes any viruses that emerge, whether from bats or any other sources. Biodiversity, the complexity of life, the health of an ecosystem provides a natural shield that absorbs the fallout from pathogens. And all of this happens without our interference. A healthy natural world is our best vaccine. But our broken relationship with nature is costing the world too much unnecessary loss of human life, plus trillions of dollars in economic losses. So what would it cost to prevent the next pandemic? Prevention means banning the trade of wildlife and protecting natural habitats. And prevention would be a much safer, cheaper, and smarter investment than having to respond to the next pandemic. But protecting the natural world would have many other benefits as well. Wild places and the species that live in them are our life support system. They generate the air we breathe. They produce the food we eat. They clean the water we drink. They protect us from wildfires and devastating floods. They are also our single best hope for protecting against climate catastrophe. We are some people, especially those who are interested in going to space, they are dedicating significant resources to invent some miraculous technologies that can capture the excess carbon pollution that we have expelled into the atmosphere. Miraculous technologies. But we already have them. Our forests, grasslands, wetlands, healthy ocean habitats absorb half of the excess carbon that we expel into the atmosphere every year. Without intact wild places, it will be impossible to achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement and avoid a climate disaster. But we are systematically destroying these ecosystems. All told, every year, the environment, our natural capital, provides about $125 trillion with a T, $125 trillion in free support to the global economy. That's more than the global GDP. That's how much value we get from the environment every year. But already our overuse of the natural world is costing us $6 trillion every year. And by 2050, those costs could rise to $28 trillion per year. All of this means that the ecological crisis, the global loss of nature, isn't just about saving nature. It's about saving ourselves. But here's the good news. We can save ourselves. Right now, the world ought to double down to help those affected by the pandemic, of course, but we should also start thinking about how to prevent the next one, to make ourselves more resilient for the future. As soon as COVID-19 was traced back to bats, some on social media were very quick to propose that the solution is to exterminate them. But proposals to exterminate bats or any other wild animal simply proves our ignorance of the nature of nature, of how the natural world works. Even if we don't know, well, there are about 9 million species of plants and animals on Earth, and about 1 billion different types of microbes. But we have described less than 2 million plants and animals. And if we don't know who lives on this planet together with us, we still know less about what's their role in the global ecosystem, in the biosphere. But even if we don't know the role of every wild species, we do know that every one of them has an important job to keep our world running smoothly. Bats, for example. Bats eat insects and keep malaria-carrying mosquito populations under control, reduce agricultural pests, thus helping farmers. Bats also are like bees, pollinating more than 250 species of plants, including important crops such as bananas, mangoes, breadfruits, agave, and durians. And agave, there is a species of bat that pollinates one agave plant in Mexico that produces tequila. So tequila lovers should love bats. And so bats, through pollinating services, contribute to the global economy with $200 billion every year. And they are amazing animals, regardless of their economic value. They are mammals that fly at night, navigating with biological radar. Some hunt insects. Others eat fruit or suck nectar from flowers. And others fish in rivers. How extraordinary is that? We just need to give ecosystems the space they need to come back and help protect us against emerging diseases and provide all these benefits that we enjoy now for free. And I know that nature can bounce back because I have seen it. Now, we all saw animals showing up in cities during the lockdown, cities without people or cars on the streets. But what I'm talking about is the permanent return of nature. And I'd like to give you an example I really love. In 1999, Cabo Pulmo in Baja California in Mexico was an underwater desert. The fishermen were so upset with not having enough fish to catch that they did something that nobody expected. Instead of spending more time at sea trying to catch the few fish left, they stopped fishing completely. They asked the Mexican government to create a national park in the sea, not take marine reserve. I returned 10 years later, and what had been a barren landscape was now a kaleidoscope of life and color. In just 10 years, it came back to pristine. It was full of fish. Even the large predators came back, like the groupers, the jacks, the sharks. And you know who else is thriving? Those visionary fishermen who are now making far more money from tourism, diving tourism inside the reserve, and better fishing around it because so many more fish are producing a disproportionately larger number of eggs, helping to replenish the areas around. And I've seen this in many other places around the world. On average, our research shows that fish are 6 times more abundant inside these marine reserves than outside. The fish are larger, and everybody benefits from it. But not enough of our planet is protected today. So how much do we need to protect? And Celia already mentioned that magic number. If we want to prevent the loss of 1 million species and the collapse of our life support system, if we want to stay below 2 degrees Celsius and avert a climate disaster, we need to use half of our planet in a responsible way, and we need the other half in its natural state. But today, as you heard earlier, we have transformed so much of our planet, and we don't have enough wild nature left to absorb our impacts. So we need to commit together to protect at least 30% of Earth's land and ocean by 2030, 30 by 30, as a milestone on the way to half Earth by 2050. 30 by 30, it's an ambitious goal. Many will say it's impossible. They'll say, we need more land and more fishing to produce food for the 10 billion people who are coming. But we already produce enough food for 10 billion people. We just wait a third of it from the field or the boat to the table and make a lot of other senseless decisions along the way. If we got a little smarter about the way we eat and about the way we cultivate the land, we could have both a healthy earth and a healthy food supply. But some will say, oh no, we cannot do it. We cannot afford it. It's too expensive. So let's talk about that for a minute. Studies suggest that a global system of protected areas covering 30% of our planet might cost about $140 billion per year. Does this sound like a lot? $140 billion? Well, let's compare it with how we use public money today. You know how much governments spend to subsidize large-scale industrial agriculture, which is wasting our soil, polluting our waters, and producing food waste? $700 billion every year. And guess the price of the subsidies that go to burning fossil fuels? $5 trillion, with a T, $5 trillion every year. So the money is there. It's just to date, it's been used to fund the activities that destroy our miracle, destroy our creation, the natural world, and puts us at risk of diseases as well. In fact, those $140 billion that we need to protect a third of our life support system is less than what the world spends today on video games. And the ultimate example of this nonsense is the COVID-19 pandemic. Governments have rightly decided that human health and well-being is a top priority and are investing trillions of dollars to respond to what could have been a preventable global crisis. But they could have avoided all of the suffering if wildlife trade was prohibited. The illegal wildlife trade is worth only $25 billion per year. Add this to the $140 billion required to manage 30% in protected areas, and it's just a fraction of the trillions of dollars in the global disruption and the loss of human life caused by not having invested in prevention. So economically, it would make much more sense to protect nature than to continue destroying it and increasing the chances of another devastating pandemic. So no matter how we look at it, protecting our natural world and stopping the global wildlife trade can generate greater value than exploiting them and reduce the risk of the next global pandemic. Then why is it that many politicians and some governments are against protecting our nature? Why are they okay with inaction? Well, simply because of pressure from some of their powerful corporate donors, which want to continue with business as usual for short-term profits, regardless of the cost to the rest of us. Big economic interests are against spreading the benefits of nature to all of humanity because they want to concentrate the benefits and spread the costs among all of us. Hopefully, the lessons learned from this pandemic will help to change that. Although humans have shown to be very good at discounting the future, including our children's future. Now, I know that people are not used to hearing a lot of optimism from scientists these days, but here is what I can say today. We can ban the trade in wildlife, which is not essential for food security or for medicine. We can protect more of our natural world, and we have enough science to know what places are the most critical. At the same time, we need to improve economic conditions for people so that they don't have to cut and burn forests in desperation for subsistence farming, which only exacerbates the problem. All of these actions together will help build a world that is safer and more resilient instead of one obsessed with unfettered growth. This pandemic is the loudest reminder for humanity that we are all connected with all other creatures on Earth and that our actions on one part of the planet can affect every other part of it. Many may think that individual actions don't matter, but the pandemic has proven them wrong. It took only one person to come in contact with that virus to create a pandemic. One interaction in one city, in one part of our planet, and the entire world comes to a halt. COVID-19 is also a powerful reminder that conservation is not just a luxury for rich countries or a romantic ideal. Our very survival and the dignity of the poor depends on our being better members of the biosphere, our larger community. And those viruses that we are afraid of are also part of the biosphere. They are more diverse and abundant than all the bacteria, plants, and animals combined. More than 200,000 different types of viruses infect mammals alone. Some can be deadly to humans, but others are beneficial. For example, bacteriophages, or phages, viruses that infect and destroy specific bacteria, can be found in the mucous membrane linings of our digestive, respiratory, and reproductive tracts. They are part of our natural immune system and provide a barrier against bacteria that could infect our bodies. Like other microbes that are integral part of our bodies, viruses blur the line between us and the rest of the biosphere. And core medical research is investigating the use of phages to replace obsolete antibiotics. Cancer researchers are also exploring alternative therapies using viruses to kill cancer cells selectively, which would be a welcome alternative to radiation or chemotherapy. These viruses are part of us and key to our health. Still, harmful viruses, bacteria, and other pathogens are not going away either. But we can reduce the spread of diseases and promote the abundance of healthful microbes in many ways, but killing wild animals is not one of them. The protection of the natural world is the vaccine that we need right now before it's too late. Even if it's just for selfish reasons, for our own survival, now more than ever, we need the wild. Thank you very much again for inviting me to speak today, Celia, and enjoy the rest of the celebration.
Dr. Saller, very many thanks on behalf of everyone here and everyone listening for that very inspiring talk, one that's both grounded in the sober-mindedness of a scientist and the passion of an activist. I've been asked to just weave together a few of the themes in our very rich discussion today. I couldn't possibly attempt to summarize, but I do just want to highlight a few aspects of the discussion on this theme of realistic hope. Our hope does have to be very realistic, very sober-minded. And one thing that has emerged from our conversations has been the wide range of challenges to hope today. Listening to Dr. Sala, for example, talk about the destruction of the Congo Basin rainforest and the effect on rainfall in Ethiopia and Egypt and the planetary effects of such a crisis. And listening to Cardinal Czerny talk about the plight of poor people in many parts of the world who are fighting just for their own survival reminds us that we are severely challenged today and tempted to despair and fear. But it's one of the paradoxes of hope, isn't it, that we need it most when the challenges to it are greatest. And one thread I think I heard in the talks today, nobody was asking whether or not to hope, but rather what shape should our hope take? And that's what I want to focus on just for a minute or two. We heard that our hope has to be active, that one danger at the moment is a kind of paralysis in the scale of the eco-social crisis. We also heard from Father Damien this call to a deeper hope. What is the ultimate source of our hope? Do we place our hope in technologies, in a geoengineering solution, forgetting that our temptation to mastery and control over nature has been at the root of our crisis? I was very struck by Dr. Saller's comment that the forests, the wetlands, the oceans, the wild parts of our world are the single best hope. That this capacity of nature to renew itself is itself a source of hope, if only we can commit to protecting the wild. And from a Christian perspective, the ultimate ground of hope is, as Professor Lisa Sowle Cahill put it, that God does not abandon us. Or in the unforgettable words of Gerard Manley Hopkins, that nature is never spent, since there lives the dearest freshness deep down things. A hope grounded in the Holy Spirit, who continues to bring renewal, to bring life across the face of the earth. Professor Cahill reminded us that we also need an urgent hope, and she contrasted a kingdom-based hope that we're very used to, cooperating with God, with each other, the possibility of human agency contributing to the coming of the kingdom on earth. But contrasting with this kingdom-based hope is an apocalyptic hope, and we need that imagination today. We see it again and again in our films and in the media, in novels and so on. The apocalyptic imagination that brings an urgent edge to our hope, that there's an imminent catastrophe around the corner if we do not act. And we also heard about a compassionate hope, as Professor Shaw talked about this need for care, and Cardinal Czerny talked about compassion, this listening that leads to compassion, because it is the poor who are affected first and most severely by the ecological crises with which we are faced. So it continues to be a question of ours, what shape our hope should take. And I believe that the Laudato Si Research Institute, while it is certainly an academic research institution, is primarily itself an act of hope. It's driven by that oxygen of moral effort that we call hope. And let's hope that together we can continue to explore what it is that can bring about the multi-level transformation which we need today. I'd now like to invite Professor Peter Davidson once again, who has composed a sonnet for the occasion of this celebration of LSRI. Thank you, Peter.
Sonnet for Trinity Sunday. Dog, rose and elder blossom for Trinity Sunday, viridian emblems of greenness renewed for this season, high summer brilliance of green washing wasteland and garden, sustained in balance still but poised in fragility. Quick this could parch, waste, diminish, wither away. But clouds mount high now, cloud bloom spreads on the elder, quickened by fall of grace, by soft rain on the river which whispers in leaf-dim twilight under the trees. Where does all greenness begin? The Trinity is spring, source, strength and return. And how may we honour our debt when debt is so great to pay? Only by co-creation which tends and attends, for we are God's hands and eyes through each green day of dog rose and elder, plough furrowed leaf of the hornbeam. Thank you so much. Thank you.
At this point, I'm going to say a warm thanks to all of you who've joined us online this evening to be part of our celebration. And there will be opportunity to hear some of the talks again through recordings, but we'd just like to thank you for joining us, as well, of course, as our live audience, and for all of those who have contributed in any way to making this celebration a really special occasion. So thank you.